Okay, we appreciate you all joining us today for this Lunch and Learn webinar. This is Preserving At-Risk Media, and we're going to talk about two types of media, magnetic media and digital media today. And Preservation Week is either this week or next week, depending on whether you're looking at the American Library Association or another organization. It seems to always shift a little bit at that end of April, beginning of May time. And then we also have May Day on May 1st, where the campaign is to do just one thing for disaster preparedness. So we want to really think about our collections and preservation, and especially mitigating risk at this time of year. It's good reminder to do that annually. So we're glad you're here. This webinar is part of the State Historical Records Advisory Board's current project on helping colleagues, especially in public libraries, with resources for community archiving. So thinking about ways to preserve those home videos or tapes, audio tapes is great right now. And of course, we're all involved in digital media and saving digital files of our personal photos and so forth. So I'm thrilled to have colleagues who are experts in these areas with me today to share what they know with you all. And we'll be hearing from Matt Waehner, who's the photographer here at the State Archives, and Alice Shahan, who's the digital archivist. So I really appreciate their time today, and I'll be putting some links in the chat as we go along to give you some of these resources, including the other recordings we already have as part of this webinar series on community archiving. And I also invite you to put your questions and comments in the chat or Q&A at any time, and I'll kind of help out with keeping up with those. And we'll definitely have some time for Q&A at the end. So with that, I'll turn it over to Matt.
Okay, thanks to everyone for joining us this afternoon. I'm going to discuss one of the most mysterious, misunderstood, and impermanent types of material in your collections, magnetic media. I'm going to define the term, try to get you excited about it, and discuss some first principles for preserving it. My name is Matt Waehner. I'm a photographer with the State Archives of North Carolina, and part of my job also includes reformatting these mysterious media. First, a definition. Magnetic media is electronic signals recorded in magnetic particles on a substrate. Basically, that's tape. Magnetic media, as a strict definition, also includes computer media, which exists in an incredible array of formats. I'm only going to briefly mention some of the issues with preserving computer media. It's beyond the scope of my knowledge and this presentation. Magnetic audio and videotape holds the voices of the second half of the 20th century. So this tape that you're seeing here in the PowerPoint is the first draft of Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. Dr. Jason Miller from North Carolina State University was doing research with people involved in the civil rights movement, and someone had this in their personal collection. This is Dr. King speaking in Rocky Mount, North Carolina in 1961, and it was the first time he used the phrase, I have a dream. So how cool is that? The tape itself has a limited physical lifespan. If it had sat on the shelf for another 30 years, it might have been unplayable. So I'm asking y'all to think about what other treasures might be sitting on your shelves. So some of y'all might have been skeptical when I said I was going to try to get you excited about magnetic media, but I think there's stuff out there to be excited about. Let's discuss the first problem with this type of media. It's fairly obvious, but just look at this picture of the tape. You can't tell what's on it unless there's a label. And here's the thing about reel-to-reel tape. It goes from reel to reel. If you envision a reel-to-reel tape player, I see that I missed the slide somehow. It starts out on the reel on the left, and then the tape physically moves to the reel on the right. If I rewind it or swap the reels and play the B-side, it goes back to the spool it started on. But if you don't do those things, it's got a whole new label now. You can leaf through a box of papers and verify in an instant that the label on the outside of the box is accurate. You have to play a tape. A video or cassette tape won't jump into another box, but it is possible for someone to tape over it. There is one oral history recording from the 1970s in the archives collection that someone saw fit to tape over the B-side of the interview with a Led Zeppelin bootleg. This was probably done by a college student recording the interviews. I did not do it. The second problem is that the media itself deteriorates faster than print or photographs. Not only that, but the quality degrades. With a text document, you're not really concerned if the text fades as long as someone can read it. Audio and video gets very steadily worse. There's more tape hiss and worse color. Videotape loses tracking signal, which causes distorted picture. Beyond the scope of this talk, computer media can easily become completely unreadable if it degrades. This is called falling off the digital cliff. Further, playing the media exposes it to friction that accelerates degradation. So a quick note, some brands of audio tape from the 1970s used an unstable adhesive. They suffer from sticky shed syndrome. And yes, that's an illustration of a sticky shed. Thank you, artificial intelligence. Make sure that open reel tape from this era is sent to people qualified to recognize it and treat it. The primary cause of sticky shed is humidity. And that brings up the question of storage. Magnetic media needs to be kept cool, but low humidity is perfectly important. If you have an unlimited budget, the National Park Service recommends long-term storage for tapes at 40 degrees Fahrenheit and 20% relative humidity. But getting the humidity that low requires a very special HVAC system. Their recommendation for usage copies is much more achievable at 60 to 74 degrees and 25 to 55% relative humidity. Those are also good conditions for paper records, especially at the low end of the humidity scale. Again, just to reiterate though, low humidity is particularly important. And similar to paper records, they definitely prefer to be kept at a very stable temperature and humidity. The next problem with this type of media is fairly obvious if you think about it. It's quite difficult to hear what is on the tape if you don't have a tape player. You need a machine to play the media, or you need to find someone who has one. Many of these machines aren't being manufactured anymore, and few young people are learning to repair them. It's not difficult to find a VHS player. They probably still have them at Walmart these days. But professional video recording prior to the year 2000 was done on formats like Betacam and U-matic. Those tape players have not been manufactured for 25 plus years. Some of them go back even further. The machines themselves are a precious resource that needs to be conserved in its own way if you happen to encounter them. And you can do this as an institution or an individual. If a donor offers you a tape machine, I strongly suggest that your institution accepts it and either keeps it or passes it on to another institution. What you're seeing in the image is a few of the things that Archives has in our collection. Larger university libraries would also generally be really happy to have these. In your personal life, if you see an old tape machine at a yard sale, get it. If you donate it to an institution, that's great. If you sell it on eBay, you're still getting it into the hands of someone who understands and values it. You should also do this with machines that don't work. Parts are scarce. So hopefully I've gotten you excited about the potential of magnetic media in your collection, but then I've brought up a bunch of problems. What are the solutions? The basic solution is to create digital surrogates so that you and your patrons can use the materials. There are a few high-level questions you need to answer which apply whether you're doing that in-house or working with a vendor. Your goal should be to capture the best version of the material you can the first time you play it, because there's always a possibility it will get damaged during playback. So you need to have institutional standards about what kind of digital files you're going to keep and how you're going to preserve them. You need to have a high quality playback device as well as a digitization device. A good vendor will be happy to talk about these topics. And if you're looking to do it in-house, I'm going to put my contact info up at the end. Just give me a call. Few institutions are going to want to develop the capability to digitize every type of media, but you might look at your collection and decide it makes sense to handle one or two types, like VHS and open reel tapes. If you decide to go forward with a project like that, feel free to reach out to me for advice on how to set it up. My contact info is on screen. Shoot me an email and we'll set up a call or video chat. And I'm going to hand it off to Alice.
Thanks, Matt. So thanks for setting this up, Matt. I'm going to continue with preservation, and we're going to sort of switch gears towards digital media. As Adrienne said, I'm the digital archivist here, and I work with the digital services section. And just like everyone here at the archives, my scope of work is broad, but my primary focus is the management of the North Carolina Digital Repository. And this includes facilitating or carrying out the ingest of digital media into our collection for permanent preservation. So for my section of our webinar, we'll look at digital records as at-risk media, and I'll share resources and recommendations to support your institution's goals or those of your personal archiving project. Some of the recommendations will cover things like what to call it, how to store it, where to store it, more formally, file naming, recommended file formats, and storage recommendations. I will also highlight some relevant tools for digital projects that the State Historical Records Advisory Board put together. And before we get into it, I just wanted to clarify some of the terms I'll use. Born digital is when the original format of the media is digital. And I may use digital surrogate to refer to the digital copy of the original. Standards, conventions, and best practices, you may know, I'll just use these terms to refer to procedures and guidelines that are widely accepted in our profession because experience and research has demonstrated that they are optimal and efficient means to produce a desired result. I adapted that last definition from the Society of American Archivists Dictionary of Archives Terminology, so I've added a link to that useful tool here. So onward, you may be asking yourself this question: how does file naming help me preserve my digital media? Well, the scary truth is that whatever the format, digital files degrade a little each time you open them. However, if you can tell what a file is by its name, you don't have to open it. A strong file naming practice goes a long way with digital preservation. Let's look at some recommendations for establishing good file naming practices, and then I'll show a couple examples that demonstrate the recommendations. To start, we don't want to be surprised by what we find inside a file or a folder. We want a file name that succinctly describes the file's content. So our recommendation is that you aim for clear, logical, and succinct file names. All of the special characters we see to the right are to be avoided. These include using a period. The only place we should find a period in a strong file name is in the file's extension, like .jpeg, for example, and that would occur automatically. But these others are sometimes common, like slashes, spaces. I've even seen commas in file names. Over here to the left, underscores and dashes, they are special characters, but they are okay to use. We recommend that you do your best to standardize how you format the date. On the left in green, you see the 4-digit year and 2-digit spaces used for month and day. They're in, slightly different formatting, but these are both good options, and they're also in compliance with international standards. So please avoid using spaces in your file name. They can cause a variety of issues. In a nutshell, spaces can make it harder for a program to find and use the file or carry out an operation with the file. But underscores and dashes are good substitutes for a space. So for this next 2 slides, we can walk through a sort of file name makeover. If you look up top, there's in gray, we have a made-up example of a poor file name. So I see a period used. I see that it's readable, it's descriptive, it does tell me it's a party, it tells me that it's an event, it's New Year's Eve, and it does include a year, these are all great things to include. But in green below, I've shown how we've used some of the recommendations in this file name. So we took away the spaces and used what's called camel case to just kind of capitalize the first letter of each word to distinguish them, but also to avoid spaces. We've used underscores. We've used a standardized date format in compliance with international standards, excuse me. And let's say I knew this party happened to be in Dallas, Texas. Including relevant details like that, another access point is also a good idea. So including the information you know in the file name is also a good start. Here, the second improved file name example, we chose to put the year first. That's also fine. Maybe you decide you want to have the year first in your file name. Go for it. Just consistency is really, really helpful. So in this next one, we have, again, a pretty descriptive file name, which is always a good start. And ways we can improve it would be removing special characters like spaces. The dash is okay, but it's also surrounded by spaces. So they also want to identify the dog in this picture, in this file name, which could be helpful, especially for like a family project. So for the improved name example, we're seeing no spaces, use of acceptable underscores and dashes. And let's say I know the Hannah family reunion is always in June. So I went ahead and added a little bit more detail to the date because I knew that. So this is your cheat sheet for file naming best practices. And I've thrown in a bonus item to this summary list. It can be helpful to establish your practice or policy. And by establish, this can be totally informal. It could be just 1 or 2 line statement or an example file name as a reminder to you, your team, or for the benefit of your successor. And if you're interested in a deeper dive into file naming, I'll share a link to this guidance document available on the archive's website. I will now move on to recommended formats for digital preservation. From the start, we should establish that we ideally work with digital media in particular, we work with access copies and preservation copies. Since I'll talk a lot about these copy types, let's make sure we have a good understanding of what they are. An access copy is a copy of the file that is lower resolution. This makes it a smaller file size. Because they're smaller, they're easier to share, transfer, or publish online. And a preservation copy, also known as a master copy or preservation master, this is a high resolution copy for preservation. So for a preservation copy, audio files should be saved in broadcast wave format. Video files saved as uncompressed audio video interleave file. And images should be saved as uncompressed TIFF files or as JPEG 2000. And as far as access copies, for audio, MP3 is recommended, MP4 for video, and JPEG for images. This is another guidance document on our website that covers file format guidelines and recommendations more in depth. It was created in 2012, but the guidance is still solid and it goes through access copies and preservation copies and everything in between. So for storage recommendations, it's going to depend on your project, your institution, your budget. Your storage needs will look different. So I'm going to try to keep the following recommendations general. We'll start with access copies. This may sound obvious, but for access copies, you're going to want to keep them accessible. So depending on how you work, that might mean local storage. So think documents on your computer. Could be the cloud, because maybe you work in different places or you're working with a partner. An external hard drive also might be a good option for your access copies. For preservation storage, we recommend 2 physical copies stored in different locations, not just like upstairs, downstairs. Think like different buildings. So if it's a personal project, maybe primary storage is your apartment, and secondary storage could be a relative's home. Keep 1 preservation copy in the cloud. We should just take a moment to consider preservation storage recommendations as simple disaster preparedness measures we can take to preserve our digital media. And if you're interested in learning more about disaster preparedness, the Archive's Records Analysis Unit is hosting a series of free 2-part webinars coming up in May, and I recommend registering soon if you're interested. I'm going to shift now to share some digital project resources developed through the State Historical Records Advisory Board, SHRAB. And they develop educational tools and programs that help documentary repositories throughout North Carolina preserve and provide access to historical records and archival materials. SHRAB works with the state archives to advance the preservation of the state's rich documentary heritage. By collaborating with all historical records custodians in the state, SHRAB's programming and advocacy promote the multivocal historical record of North Carolina's diverse communities. I wanted to highlight some of these resources that were developed fairly recently to support this mission and might be of interest to you. This tip sheet on digital scrapbook options can be found on our website at the address you see on the slide. It identifies different resources with a summary of their scope or capabilities. Also, it looks kind of cute. I think this is a really interesting resource, and some of these tools I'm just not familiar with. I also really like this tip sheet on personal digital archiving with just little things you can do to help move your project along. There are a host of tip sheets available on the Strab projects page on our website. Cool titles like on oral history or cemetery preservation, mold, something super useful to know. Maybe they'll be of use to you, maybe inspire future projects, but you should check them out. That's all I have for my presentation. I have my contact there if you have any questions later on, but I will be available to answer them right now too.
Okay, thank you, Alice. I have a couple questions, and first one's for Matt, but maybe the second one's for both of you. So, Matt, just thinking about the composition of magnetic media and the magnetic particles, and I'm wondering what those are made of. Are they metallic?
They are magnetite, which is iron oxide. And then I don't know how many people in the audience are old enough to remember audio tapes like cassettes. There's a few different formulations. This is actually relevant though to sticky shed syndrome because most reel-to-reel tapes, tape players are vertical, like the tapes are vertically mounted. So one of the tricks for recognizing that a tape has sticky shed promptly is to put a blank sheet of white paper under it. And as you're playing the tape, you are looking for tiny little black pieces of dust to start landing on that piece of paper. And if you see that, then you stop it immediately. But those tiny little black particles, which are mostly iron oxide, kept being used all the way up until computer disks. So into the early 2000s, and I guess still if you watch VHS.
Okay, so that metallic composition makes sense with the relative humidity risk, because I know that metals in general should be at as low a relative humidity as possible, which is hard. Like you said, in archives, you're kind of aiming for more of that mid-range RH, around 30 to 50%.
Yeah. I think the iron is already oxidized, but it's the adhesive that has a problem with the humidity, and it's the bond between the tape, like the physical support of the tape, and the magnetic stuff breaks down. It is possible to bake them in something like a food dehydrator, but I've never seen an exact proper recipe, and our conservators are very professional, and they're not just willing to try it based on guesswork.
DIY recommendations, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, Ivana has a question in the chat. So if you don't feel equipped to handle in-house transfers, is there anything you recommend looking for in vendors? And are there vendors we use for services that tend to offer those?
So Archives does have a list of vendor requirements, and Adrian, do you know where to find that document?
I've got it. I can put it in the chat.
Okay,
oh,
great. That'd be good.
That would be awesome.
It would take me a little while to find it, but we do share our vendor list with the
Excellent.
institutions we work with regularly. So that's great if Alice has it on hand.
Yeah,
Okay, so
amazing.
we have a more general question about how we got into the archives field. And we have someone with experience in the public library field, but wants to maybe consider transitioning into archives, applying for graduate school soon.
I can speak to that. I can go first.
Alice might be the best to speak to that because neither Matt nor I have that official archivist training.
Yeah, I'm really happy in our field. It's definitely made for people who are curious and have a sense of lifelong learning, because you will always be learning things with every single project. Every project is different, whether you're processing them, physically preparing them for preservation and research, or trying to work out some sort of digital rat's nest in a way that's not going to damage the materials. I mean, it's just like there's a lot of room for growth in the field. I do think that I mean, I can't say it. Of course, I want to encourage you to do that, but I did go the route through getting a MLIS. I did learn most. I felt like I got a greater education in the field rather than through the actual program, but I have been grateful for the choice that led me to start it. What about you, Matt?
I have a degree in photography and no specific archives training prior to coming here, which I've been here now almost 20 years. I think that the field in general has probably moved more toward more formalized degrees, and it's probably a little harder to get into the field that way today than it was at that time. But I recommend it. I really have enjoyed working here. It's smart, curious people, and yeah, I do suggest getting in if you can. But it most of the people I've seen hired in the last few years, both at our institution and in others, they really seem to have specific formal education in archives.
Yeah, and so if you have public library experience already, Mel, it would make sense to get that MLS or MSIS or one of those information science degrees. And if you already have that, then maybe there's a process you can go through to become a certified archivist. I think that can help for even for those of us who do not have those library science or information science degrees. So I came into the archives as a trained historian, and I've had collections management experience in museums over a number of years. So I sort of came into the outreach role, and I'm not doing the actual archiving, but I know enough basics about it, just like Matt, from working here now for me 5 years in the archives and doing collections management work before that with more of a variety of materials that I can help point people in the directions, like to my colleagues, Matt and Alice, so that they can get answers to their questions about archiving. So yeah, we're still looking for that vendor list, and we can definitely send that out when the recording's ready to all registrants. But another question I have is, so in our work through the Traveling Archivist Program with small institutions, one of our exceptions to the rule of keeping originals is newspapers, because of course the original has so much inherent bias, it's going to break down quickly. So if you can microfilm it, that's your preservation copy. And which may be a magnetic media, I'm not sure. Microfilm?
Microfilm is photographic film, like
So there's no
it's
magnetic element on there.
no, and it's quite durable, and the technology, required to look at it is only a magnifying glass. I mean, it's not easy to read it with a magnifying glass, but it can be accessed. Yeah.
So that would be more the preservation medium for newspaper, and we recommend institutions can get that done, then they can dispose of the original newspaper, especially if it's in those sort of late 19th, early 20th century years where it's especially brittle and acidic. Would then, people are digitizing newspaper, and that has amazing capabilities for access and finding individual topics and names and so forth. So between microfilm and digitization, you're great. But with magnetic media, if you can reformat and digitize, what would you feel the best practices would be? Keeping the original, even though it is so vulnerable and degrading over time, or would reformatting be in some way be a viable alternative to keeping the originals?
I would suggest keeping the original unless it's just taking up a large amount of space. Just with the possibility of finding something different on it in the future, or just, anything. One of the issues with newspapers is it is subject to like mold and pests and stuff that aren't really likely to happen to magnetic media, which are made of plastic. So I think that unless you have a huge amount of it and you just need shelf space, I would suggest keeping it. It doesn't have the same issues quite that newspaper does.
Okay. Any advice for the digital reformatted files once folks have been able to achieve that step and maintaining those? Alice, maybe that's an Alice question.
Totally an Alice question.
I think that it's sometimes it's like the most common question I get is like, well, we've digitized everything, so you're good. And I'm like, you're not good. It's like someone else came up with this phrase, but it's not like, it's like getting a free puppy. Like you have to take care of the puppy. It's not done. So I think just starting with your mindset that digitization is an excellent first step. So it's like, it depends on the needs of the project or the institution to determine if it would be more valuable to keep the original as well. There's several things that would come into play to lead you to the decision to dispose of the originals or not. But I think the bigger question is just the upkeep of digital records and management of your digital media. And sometimes it's just like, some of the things I talked about, they're not that sophisticated, but they are solid starting points for your program.
Thank you. And of course, always put in a plug for the Digital Heritage Center. I know everything that's happening with federal grants is kind of threatening their operations to some degree, but they're an amazing partner for all of North Carolina's cultural heritage institutions, and the smallest ones that we often work with do not have capacity to maintain digital files, especially large digital files. So the Digital Heritage Center has been a great platform for hosting and providing access. Okay. Ivana's put something into the chat that maybe I'm too old because I remember tape decks, and maybe Alice, this. Every time you're tempted to think digital media doesn't need maintenance, ask a teenager the name of the save symbol. I don't know.
It's a floppy disk, like one of the square ones. I think.
Right. The little icon on the computer. Yeah.
Yeah, I might have one here.
Okay, now I'm with you. With you, Ivana.
I should have one within arm's reach, but I can't find it right now. Yeah.
So Matt, you kind of advocate hoarding antiquated equipment a little bit, and I'm wondering, you showed us a nice and neat slide of some of what the State Archives hoards, but is there a lot more?
There's quite a bit more. There's several, and I think y'all can see the ones that are in most active use there behind me. But we have things like a mini tape player. We've never been called on to use this, but those could be used for oral history. So when we see things like that, we get it. And again, I don't suggest that every institution should necessarily hoard equipment like that, but I do strongly suggest passing it on to someone, whether it's an institution or a individual that will make use of it.
Okay, another question, broad question about the field. Would you all say the need for archivists is ever present, both personally versus politically versus job security wise?
Yeah, when I became an archivist, it was during Web 2.0. And because we had Google, people were like, archivists are going to be out of a job. And that didn't happen. And what did happen was we just learned new technologies, became very good ambassadors for new technologies like you have to do in this field because you're going to be working with them or preserving them. So, I mean, I think like anything, it'll probably just change, evolve. I am not going anywhere.
Yeah. And the political moment is it's unusual right now, but I think it's best to think about the moment versus the decades beforehand, and it is more likely to be normal in the future than not normal. Trying to put that in a neutral way.
Here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and one thing I'll say is that with digital media has just come an explosion of records. I mean, as a historian, when I was in grad school, there was concern that, oh, things are moving to the computer and we won't have records anymore for historians to work with for late 20th century and beyond. And it's really just exploded. The formats have changed, but the original records are still possible and still there. And as one thing that amazes me with our state record center is just the amount it ingests, and then some of those meet their deadlines and can go back out, but others get preserved forever after being analyzed by our staff and deciding that yes, there is historical value for these. They're going into the state archives forever. So state archives certainly has a constant role with citizen access to government, and that's never going to go away, unless the government's relationship with its citizens changes radically. But it's great to have that ability to find out what happened after a certain point and have those open records laws.
Mhm.
All right. Well, I don't see any other questions, but we've definitely covered some great ground today, and I think hopefully inspired people to preserve their magnetic media, to name their files in a consistent and concise and appropriate way. No more periods. So I think we've covered a lot of great ground, and I appreciate your time and your expertise, Matt and Alice. So thanks for being with us today.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for coming, everybody.
All right, take care, everyone, and we're all available by email or phone.